Hello, everybody. I'm Burt Garland, shareholder at Ogletree Deacons, and welcome to This Week at Work.
Welcome to the only show about the workplace that offers you front row seats and a microphone, bringing you practical, timely, and accurate insight so that you can more effectively lead your organization. It's Wednesday, December 21st, episode 210. Today, from lame duck to new paddlers, what employers can expect from Congress. Special guest Jim Plunkett gives us an inside look at what the Democratic majority in the House has been trying to do before handing control over to Republicans, and also what might be the first order of business for the newly sworn in. And politicking isn't just a sport for a select few. We'll have a little fun at the expense of the office politicians we all know. And as always, we'll cover all the breaking news you need to know. Speak up and ask your questions now. All this and more on This Week at Work.
Welcome once again, everybody, to the show. Phil is out this week. I heard rumors that he has a snowblower being delivered from Amazon and has invested in a driveway clearing business. But there's a caveat to that. My understanding is that Phil's only taking clients of owners of homes that are worth $3 million and up. So he asks that you comment with your contact information if you qualify. So go ahead and if you want Phil to come out there and shovel your driveway with his new snowblower or blow your driveway, go ahead and put that in the chat for us. He'll be happy to get out to your place. Oh, I might add, don't hold your breath for Phil to actually get there. In all seriousness, we have today Jim Plunkett back. He is my colleague, my co-shareholder in Ogletree Deacons in our Washington, D.C. office. Jim, welcome back to the program. We're happy to have you. How are things over in D.C.?
You know, things are crazy, Bert. First of all, thank you for having me back. We're getting a little bit of that weather that you all are experiencing, I think, now. And believe it or not, that's driving a lot of what's happening in Congress. It's encouraging them. It's encouraging our legislators to try to make a deal and head out before they get snowed in or iced in. But so very busy times in DC, that's for sure.
The good thing about our legislators, they're always worried about themselves. So they're making sure that they get out for the holidays. Despite the suffering of millions of Americans in this country. But I digress a little bit. I noticed, Jim, you and I are both wearing our red flannels today, kind of reflective of the weather that's out there. And we'll be bringing Jim back onto the program in a few minutes here. Before we bring Jim back on to talk about really what's happening in DC, I want to introduce today's poll to you. The question for our listeners and our viewers today is, what is your outlook for the next couple of years? What's your outlook for the next couple of years? And we're really kind of focusing on this from the perspective of work. And so their choices are today: my job will be harder and business will decline. My job will be harder, but business will improve. My job will be easier, but business will decline. And my job will be easier and business will improve. And then finally, I have no idea what to expect. So share your own egregious stories in the comments here, things that you're expecting to transpire over the next couple of years, what we think the outlook is going to be for 2023. I know, again, we try to keep kicking COVID in its tail and putting it in the rearview mirror from 2020 to 2021 and now to 2022. And it looks like it's still lingering, and problems are compounded with high inflation, tight job market. Things are all over the place, but let us know your thoughts on there. Next is, and it's a little odd without Phil doing a transition for me, but it is time for Lawyer on the Clock.
All right, it's time to look into what's trending in employment law. Lawyer, you're on the clock.
All right, so thank you for playing that role in, Nick. I appreciate that. The first thing I want to talk about, it is a really good time to remind everybody that minimum wages in the states across the country may be adjusted. There are probably about, 20, 25 states that look like they're having minimum wage adjustments. Ogletree, again, is a service to its clients. and to other guests, you can go to our website, and there are some interactive maps available on our website. One of those is a minimum wage chart that Nick has put up on the screen for everyone to see. And it's really nice because you can click on your state and it'll tell you what the minimum wage is and the effective date. And so states from Washington, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Arizona, Maine, Colorado, Maryland, Vermont, Illinois for our listeners, Rhode Island, Florida, Hawaii, Missouri, New Mexico, Virginia, Delaware, Alaska, Minnesota, Nebraska, Nevada, Michigan, Ohio, and Montana are all seeing minimum wage increases in the new year. Most of these states, the minimum wage increases are effective on January 1, 2023. New York's is effective 12/31 of 2022. Florida and Hawaii are September. Nevada is in July. So just keep those in mind. Always a good idea to check your minimum wage chart, and you could find that on the Ogletree website. The another piece of news I wanted to talk about is everybody will recall that on December 13, 2022, our president signed what's known as the Respect for Marriage Act. He signed that into law, which guarantees marriage equality for same-sex and interracial couples under federal law. The Respect for Marriage Act requires that states recognize marriages between two individuals so long as the marriage was legal in the state where it was performed. The law also formally repeals the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, which had defined marriage under federal law as being between one man and one woman. That law had remained on the books, even though it was struck down by the Supreme Court of the U.S. in the 2013 decision of United States versus Windsor. The bill also empowers the Attorney General to bring civil actions for declaratory and injunctive relief against those acting under the color of state law who refuse to recognize valid marriages. One thing I do want to point out is this law will not require all states to allow the performance of same-sex marriages as is currently the law under the Supreme Court's 2015 decision in Obergefell versus Hodges. The bill also explicitly does not recognize polygamous marriages in the United States. So that's just a quick update. As far as this applies to your businesses, just keep in mind that from the perspective of benefits and those types of things, same-sex marriages in benefits do need to be provided to same-sex couples in your state, just the same as they would be applied to non-same-sex couples in a marriage, and again, in most of these states. So just keep that in mind. Next, I want to talk about is and Jim may touch base on this. There's a new spending bill that's been pushed through Congress, and it's, I think, a $2.4 or $2.7 trillion spending bill. Jim, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on that number. But for our purposes today, I want to point out that $13.8 billion of that is devoted to the United States Department of Labor for fiscal year 2023, and $299 million for the National Labor Relations Board. This is a lot of funding. The DOL's Wage and Hour Division would receive $260 million out of this bill, while OSHA would garner around $632 million for fiscal 2023. They have also proposed to increase the NLRB's funding by a total of $25 million, again, bumping it from $299 million, but it falls short, or bumping it to $299 million, but it falls short of the $319.4 million that both the House and the Senate Appropriations Committee had proposed earlier in the summer. So just keep in mind that those agencies are likely to remain very well funded into through 2023, which means for employers that their agents are going to be actively out there looking to hold employers accountable and knocking on your doorsteps and banging down, or knocking on the doors and standing on your doorsteps, I should say, in order to look for violations in the labor area and under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So just a couple of things out there for you. Another thing that I'll cover real quickly is there's been some studies that have come out recently, including one from Bloomberg Law from their daily labor report that came out just yesterday. And I do want to point this out because the title of the article was Early Benchmarking of U.S. Labor Data Surprises Some Job Watchers. And what happened is that the government annually revises in early February to U.S. payroll figures. They make revisions to the U.S. payroll figures in February. And what they've done this year is that this revision suggests substantially weaker job growth in 2022 than the official figures suggest. The Bureau of Labor Statistics annual benchmark revisions really try to aim to better align the national employment count with the state unemployment insurance records. Last week, the researchers at the Philadelphia Fed said their early benchmark estimates on the second quarter alone showed that in aggregate, 10,500 net new jobs were added during the period, rather than 1,121,500 jobs estimated by the sum of the states. This is a really, really startling outcome here. Economists point out that a revision of close to 1 million jobs would be extremely large, considering the average benchmark revision is about 150,000 a year, and that extrapolating 3 months of data to a year is precarious. But the region really did warn that the Fed Bank warns that while early benchmarking can help to augment the understanding of national economic trends, the early snapshot are subject to revisions, and often 2 or 3 quarters of data may need to confirm that the national economy has reached a turning point. All I can do is tell you to keep an eye on the job market. Apparently, the job market has slowed a lot more than what the Fed had been reporting. The last thing I'm going to do is encourage people. Again, it's a partisan website, perhaps. I want to give a web address out there. It's called committeetounleashprosperity.com, committeetounleashprosperity.com. And they published a really interesting study the other day that said that these economists, there's 3 economists that did the study here, and they found that government payments and free healthcare benefits can pay more than the equivalent of $100,000 per year in 3 states, and the equivalent of an $80,000 a year job in 13 states. And these benefits really consist of unemployment and Affordable Care Act subsidies for a family of 4 with 2 working parents who receive unemployment compensation. And I'm going to ask Nick if he can put up a graphic that I sent him on the screen there. According to this study, it shows how much people can get in government subsidies in any given state in the country and what that amounts to. The reason why I'm sharing this with you is if you are one of the organizations that's still experiencing great difficulty hiring employees, this may suggest an answer to you that employees are actually finding that they're better off sitting on the sidelines rather than obtaining employment. So that's what I have for you today on Lawyer on the Clock. And now it's time, we're going to keep the fun going as we enter into Philburt's Forum.
You've just entered Philburt's Forum, where we peel the onion back and take a lighter look at the workplace.
All right. Instead of Philburt's Forum today, I think it's Jim Burt's Forum. Mm-hmm. And Jim, I'll ask you to comment a little bit as we're talking about what we might expect from the political environment and how it will affect our workplace. We shouldn't forget that there's another political environment we need to recognize, and that is everybody's favorite, the politics of the office or office politicians. Here's a list of 7 types of office politicians from quill.com. I'd love for our viewers to tell us how many of these are a little too close for comfort. Number 1, we have the office joker, and that's the person who might make light of everything in the office. Everything's funny and everything's a joke to this employee. The office gossiper. This is the know-all and tell-all in the workplace. Jim, I don't know, do you have any of those in our Ogletree office in the DC office of Ogletree?
Maybe one or two, but I don't think I want to give out any names, Bert.
All right. I'm sure they appreciate that. I'm sure, we could break that down a little bit instead of just an officer and an office gossiper. I know we have lots of know-alls and tell-alls, though, in all of our offices.
For sure.
You can't help that with having a bunch of lawyers. All right. The office fawner, constantly flattering people. I know we've got one of those in our St. Louis office. I know exactly who that is. The office saboteur, the grown-up version of the playground bully. And some examples of this might be somebody who's constantly going around the office and undermining the other employees' work, or just the other employees in the office. Quill.com says the other type of office politician is an office pirate, who literally steals ideas from coworkers or passes off the work of others as his or her own. The office crusader pushes hard to get folks on his or her side of just about any issue. And then finally, the office coach, always available to give advice. And so thank God for number 7, because that might help tamp down some of 1 through 6 that we see. But in any event, we kind of make a little light of it. We're talking about politics today. And that's what Philburt's Forum covered. And I think what we'll do is probably transition right into the Employers Lounge and the poll results. And we want to talk today about the lame duck to new paddlers, what employers can expect from Congress taking place. I know that's why everybody attended today. Before we do that, Nick, if you don't mind, can we bring up the poll results? All right, so I'm having a little bit of trouble seeing those poll results on the screen there, but it looks like to me that things are breaking down pretty much down the middle. Is that right?
Yeah,
Nick?
We are down the middle. We have 50%. So on one side, we have the job will be harder, but business will improve. And on the other side, my job will be easier, but business will decline.
Very interesting.
So we need more results to pad one way or the other. Don't let the audience speak for you.
It's interesting. We've got a 50-50 breakdown. Our poll is hopelessly divided today, much like the country. And so I think that does perfectly segue us over to introduce Jim. Jim is a valued colleague of mine, sitting in the DC office of Ogletree Deacons. Those of you who have watched the program for our 210 episodes, you've seen Jim several times. He is our DC insider, and I've asked Jim to join me on the program today in Phil's absence so that he can provide much more value than Phil normally provides, and that is to share with us what's going on in DC. What can employers expect? What can we as citizens expect from our lame duck Congress as the year winds down and the weather is moving in?
Sure. Well, thank you again, Bert, for having me. I would say if we could go back to, the office politicians thing, I might offer like the Debbie Downer or the complainer, right? Somebody who's always finding the negative in everything, whether it's the lunch that they had or the work assignment that they've got. And then I'll raise my hand as being guilty as the sort of fantasy football talker, right? And that could be because I've done well, but I don't know. But those are two others that came to my mind.
Anytime you bring up the NFL, that's a pretty sore subject to those of us in the St. Louis area. So I'll let you move past that one and on to the real topic.
I can imagine. All right, so let's dive in. We've got a few minutes left, Bert, and talk a little bit about what's going on in Congress and the agencies as we're wrapping up 2022 and then looking ahead to 2023. Things have been moving real fast, Bert, in this lame duck session, right? It seems like ages ago that Congress hammered out that agreement to avoid the national freight rail strike, right? Mm-hmm. But that was a major topic, a major issue that Congress dealt with a couple of weeks ago, and everybody's glad that they did that. And is sort of an indication, a sign that when Congress wants to do something, they can really do it and move quickly. After that, they moved on to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is another major piece of legislation that they have to do every year. They've passed it for 62 straight years. They got that wrapped up last week. And as you mentioned, Bert, now they're on to the government funding, right, which expires this Friday at 11:59 p.m. Some of you might recall that we were in a similar situation in 2018 heading into 2019, and that resulted in a 35-day federal government shutdown that set the record for the longest shutdown in U.S. history. All signs are pointing towards avoiding that. As you mentioned, Bert, we've got the text early this morning in the wee hours, I guess, of last night. In addition to some of that funding that you talked about is super important. Like DC is just like anything else, follow the money, right? So where the money goes, that's how they're able to hire more inspectors, more attorneys, more investigators, more regulators to make life more challenging for employers.
I like your use of the word more challenging. That's to say the least. And I did look it up real quickly. Jim, I think I had said 2.4 or 2.7 trillion. I think it's actually 1.7 trillion. Is that consistent with your understanding?
Yeah, it's 1.7, but I think, the Senator Everett Dirksen, he said, what, $1 million here and $1 million there. And soon you're talking about real money, but now we're talking about billions and trillions, right? So how things have changed. Two other points, Bert, that I want to make about this omnibus spending bill. First, you mentioned employee benefits in the context of the Respect for Marriage Act. There's some significant employee benefits provisions in the omnibus. Specifically, it looks like what they're calling the Secure 2.0 Act is going to be included, and that's sort of a mishmash of several different retirement-related bills. That one of them has passed the House, and there were three in the Senate. Retirement and encouraging for retirement and making it easier for workers to save for retirement is one of those few workplace issues, Bert, in Washington, D.C., where there is some bipartisan agreement. Both parties think that it's good for Americans to be saving money for retirement. So these provisions in there would, allow for things like auto enrollment in the IRA, make it easier for smaller employers to join together to provide retirement plans for their employees and that sort of thing. So if you're in that employment benefit space, be on the lookout for that. And then one other thing that was not included, Bert, that people here in Washington, D.C., many trade groups and worker advocates actually were both hoping to see was enactment of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Mm-hmm. And that's a bill that I've probably talked to you about this a couple of times because it's a bill that has significant bipartisan support that is supported by business groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, like SHRM, like the National Association of Manufacturers, and it had, I think, 100 or 99 Republicans voted for it in the House. There were signs indicating that there were at least 10 Republicans in the Senate that would vote for it. It got hung up for I don't know why. It would have made or would have required employers to provide reasonable workplace accommodations for pregnant workers, so things like easing of lifting restrictions, more frequent bathroom breaks, that sort of thing. So there was a big push to get that through. It's a response to the sort of fuzzy gray area that's been created in this. In the pregnancy space by the UPS versus Young case from the Supreme Court several years ago, and it was supposed to provide some clear guidelines for that. It did not make it in, and because of the results of the election and the Republicans in the House, this is not going to be a priority for them. So there's going to be no action on this bill until the political winds change and we've got different makeup in Congress. So we've got one thing that was included, retirement benefits, and the other thing that was not included, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That's Congress right now. They're wrapping up, as I mentioned. They've got the jets warmed up, and they all want to get on board before this storm comes into town. The agencies never stop, as you know, Bert. In particular, for your traditional labor management folks. The NLRB is at a very busy time right now. And the reason for that is because one of their members, John Ring, who's a former chair, he's a Republican member of the board. He's exited the board. His term expired. last week. And as is tradition at the board, there's a flurry of activity once a member leaves, because they've been working on all these cases and they want to sort of wrap up the work that member did and performed on that particular case before they release it to the public. So we've seen a couple of significant cases coming out of the board over the last week or so, and there's sort of a lag effect, right? There's like, so there'll be sort of a trickle with that from the board in the next few weeks. So that's 2022, I think, and just sort of the rest of it in the few days that we've got. What does 2023 look like? So in Congress, that election, that special election, and this is a little bit like deja vu all over again, that special election in Georgia is really significant. And you might be wondering, well, the Democrats at that point, even before that special election, or the rerun election, before the rerun election was held, Democrats had already secured a majority in the Senate, right? Because they had 50 members in the Senate plus Vice President Harris. That gives them the tie-breaking vote. So what does one extra vote do for them? Well, what it does is that it really allows them to stack the committees to give Democrats a majority in a way that helps them move legislation and, more importantly, nominees through the committee. So what we saw the last 2 years was this power sharing agreement between Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell, in which the committees were evenly divided with, say, 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats. So to get, say, a nominee through, say, like a wage and hour administrator through, or somebody to sit on the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission through, Democrats needed to get Republican support, or they needed to wait for Republicans to not be in town to vote, right? But now they're going to have that one vote majority on all the committees. That's going to make it easier for them to get, most importantly, their agency nominees and their judicial nominees. And then they can be confirmed with a simple majority vote on the Senate floor. Legislation will still be tough because they'll need 9 Republicans to join with them. So that'll still be a challenge for them. One thing that I've got my eye on, Bert, that I think is going to be really interesting in the Senate in the next 2 years is that the new chair of the Senate Health, Education, and Labor and Pensions Committee, called the HELP Committee, the new chair of that committee is Senator Bernie Sanders from Vermont.
So what will this mean for us, Jim? If Bernie Sanders, the independent, but the far left independent, taking the lead of this committee.
Right, it's going to be wild, Bert. Right, so if you remember, he threw his hat in the ring in early 2021 to be Secretary of Labor. Right, so he's all about the workplace. But interestingly, he's been on this committee for years, and it's obviously something that I follow, a committee that I follow quite a bit. But he hardly ever shows up to the hearings. I wonder if it's because he thinks that's sort of beneath him, or if he's not, controlling things, he's not interested in it. So obviously now he's going to be much more interested. He is a huge supporter of Medicare for all and lowering prescription drug prices and that sort of thing. And so that's part of the jurisdiction of the committee. So I think you're going to see a lot of healthcare, particularly since the ranking member is Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, and he's a doctor. So there could even be some bipartisanship on some of these things in the healthcare space. But he's not going to neglect the labor and employment space, right? And so Bernie is a huge fan of things like the PRO Act and the Employee Free Choice Act and easing employees' paths to organizing. He's got a bee in his bonnet, I think, over the last couple of years about the warehouse, logistics, and transportation industry, and sort of big retailers with large supply chain operations and warehouses. And he's held several hearings and press conferences decrying what he thinks are, poor working conditions in those settings.
You're talking about like the Amazon space and probably Walmart, big distribution centers I would imagine.
Exactly. Yes. When he doesn't say well, sometimes he says their name, but other times he'll have these hearings and you know who he's talking about without him actually having to say it. The other thing that he's a big fan of, Bert, is a federal. Oh, here we go. I love it.
There's Bernie in his mask and gloves.
Look at that. Yeah. The other thing that he's a fan of is federal blacklisting schemes. Like, so if you're a federal contractor, he wants to prohibit you from getting a federal contract if you've committed an unfair labor practice or a wage and hour violation or that sort of thing. So be on the lookout for that. I know we're about to wrap up. I want to just say this about the House. Obviously, the House with Republican control means very little chance of major labor and employment legislation passing. I think that's good news for employers, right? So we won't have to deal with things like the PRO Act, the Paycheck Fairness Act, increases in the minimum wage.
Well, we also hold on though. We still will need to contend with the Democrat majority, maybe even 3-1 at the NLRB for a period of time. That's going to try to push through as much of the PRO Act as they can through the administrative agency instead of through Congress. Don't you agree?
That's for sure, right? So watch for them to try to instill card check through the administrative process rather than the legislative process by dusting off an old, a decades old NLRB doctrine. They're going into the joint employer space, right? They want everybody to be an employer of everybody, and they want every worker to be an employee and every employee to be a member of a union. So for sure, the NLRB is going to keep going. The Republicans in the House are going to hold the NLRB's feet to the fire on this, right? There's going to be a lot of investigations of and information requests of the chair of the NLRB, Lauren McFerrin, and in particular, the general counsel of the NLRB, Jennifer Abruzzo. Republicans are still angry that she's in the position that she's in because President Biden, in an unprecedented fashion, fired the general counsel of the NLRB in January of 2021. So that's what the Republicans are going to be able to do with their power in the House. They're not going to be able to get any, legislation through, but they will be able to throw sand in the gears of the regulatory apparatus and try to slow down what they're doing at the Department of Labor for, say, like the independent contractor regulation, or what they're doing at the National Labor Relations Board, with card check and everything else. So it'll be an interesting 2 years. And I've been telling people, if you like political theater, get your popcorn ready.
Well, Jim, I appreciate that invaluable insight from our DC insider, Jim Plunkett. Jim, thank you as always for participating. I've got one question for you before we go, though, Jim.
Sure.
Do you have any idea, and don't look it up for me, and I want the listeners to check my math on this, and I'm going to help you out here, but I'm going to ask you, do you have any idea how many miles away from the Earth the sun is?
I have no idea, Bert.
It's 96,782,000 miles away from the Earth, or 96 million or so miles. Do you have any idea? We talked about a $1.7 trillion budget. How far, if you set those dollar bills end to end, could you get to the sun?
I have no idea, Bert.
How about to the sun and almost all the way back? If we stacked $1.7 trillion end to end, we'd make it to the sun and almost all the way back. How about that?
I believe it, Bert. I've done some of these exercises where you say, like, how much is a million? Like, if you time it, a million seconds, and then, a billion seconds, and then, a trillion seconds. And it's amazing. Like you sort of just think a million, a billion, a trillion. Yeah. But when you get up into that trillion, it is astounding how significant that number can be.
This is news that you can use right here, I'm telling you.
Exactly. A little bit of trivia for everyone. Again, please check my math. Well, I appreciate everybody's attendance on the program today. On December 29th, we are going to have the best of 2022. So join us live next Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central Time. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Feature Group. Take care. I hope everybody has a happy holidays and a happy and prosperous and healthy new year.
Thank you once again for tuning in to This Week at Work. If you enjoy the show, please share it with your colleagues. Forward our invites. Share the link aimea.org/thisweekatwork, or follow or subscribe wherever you get your news and entertainment, like LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're everywhere you are. And you can be part of the show. Send your questions and comments anytime to info@thisweek.work. We'll see you next week, 7:30 a.m. Central Time, when we discuss what's happening this week at work.